Have you ever heard someone say gaming is for boys? If you have, do me a favor and tell them to Okay, sorry. Monetization, YouTube, family friendly. Okay. But yes, you've heard it. Gaming is for boys. And people say it like it's a law of physics, like it's gravity or taxes, or the fact that every online match has at least one guy named Dark Reaper 69 or something like that. But here's the thing. That idea is not ancient. It's not natural, and it's not even true historically. Women didn't join gaming later. They were here at the beginning, literally at the blueprint stage. So how did we get from that to Xbox Live voice chat being a psychological horror experience? That's what this video is about. Because gaming didn't become a boys' club by accident. It happened through marketing, corporate panic, and a culture that got weirdly territorial. And if you stick with me until the end, you'll see how the same exact cycle keeps repeating, and why it might be starting up again right now. I know, I just blew your mind with all of this, so go ahead, pick your brain up off the floor, give it a good dust, and let's get into it. To understand how gaming became gendered, it helps to start at the beginning, when the industry was still forming and the label gamer didn't even exist yet. In the earliest years of video games, the industry was marked by a surprising amount of gender fluidity. Before anyone was arguing about what counts as a real game, women were already shaping the medium's potential for storytelling, education, and simulation. One of the most significant early examples is Mabel Addis, an educator who in 1964 wrote the script and narrative structure for the Sumerian game on the IBM 7044. This wasn't a simple arcade-style experience. It was a text-based simulation where players managed a Sumerian city-state, making decisions about resources and governance while responding to crises. It taught economics and history through systems and consequence-driven gameplay. In other words, the DNA of games like Sims and Civilization existed decades before those franchises ever appeared. Basically, the Sumerian game walked so the simulation games we know today could run. Addis helped establish that video games could be more than reflex-based entertainment. They could be about people and society. They could model complex systems and tell stories. Unfortunately, that concept would later get buried under decades of marketing and cultural gatekeeping, but it never fully disappeared. As the industry began professionalizing in the late 1970s, the rise of microprocessors opened the door for more sophisticated commercial game development. This period produced some of the first recognized professional game designers, including Carol Shaw. Shaw joined Atari in 1978 with a master's in computer engineering and became one of the first female game designers working at a major company. Her work on 3D tic-tac-toe pushed beyond the usual flat logic of early games by using a tiered multi-layer grid. She was experimenting with spatial complexity long before the average home console could properly support it. In 1982, Shaw also worked on River Raid, a vertically scrolling shooter that sold over 1 million copies and cemented her legacy as an industry icon. The early era of gaming wasn't defined by girl games and boy games. It was defined by technical innovation, and women were part of that process. They weren't spectators, they were builders. So yeah, women didn't join gaming later. They were literally there at the blueprint stage, which makes what happens later even more ridiculous. That same year, another important milestone appeared through the work of Von Mai, a Vietnamese refugee who programmed Wabbit in 1982. Early game development was a constant battle against hardware limitations, and the Atari 2600 in particular offered almost no flexibility. But Mai overcame these constraints by layering sprites on top of each other to create a colorful and fluid walking animation for the protagonist, Billy Sue. This method was clever, resourceful, and technically demanding. Wabbit is often recognized as one of the first console games to feature a named human female protagonist, which also makes it one of the earliest attempts at explicitly reaching a female audience through representation. So the idea that women are some new demographic is already falling apart, and we're not even out of the early 80s yet. The later claim that gaming belongs to men becomes harder to defend when the history shows women were present from the start. The arcade era reinforced this even further. During the golden age of arcades, roughly between 1978 and 1983, the industry hit a demographic ceiling. Arcades were dominated by young men, particularly those drawn to violent themes and combat-focused games. Manufacturers realized that if they wanted to expand profits, they needed a broader audience. The easiest way to do that was to appeal to women and couples, and to make arcades feel like social spaces rather than testosterone temples. One of the most iconic results of this strategy was Pac-Man in 1980. Toru Iwatani intentionally moved away from the tough, aggressive aesthetic of popular arcade titles and leaned into something cute, simple, and universally approachable. Instead of combat, the gameplay centered around eating. The approach worked so well that by the early 1980s, reports suggested that as many as 60% of Pac-Man players were women. The arcade became a place where women influenced by second-wave feminism and shifting cultural norms expected to participate as equals in public entertainment. The success of Pac-Man wasn't an isolated case, though. Donna Bailey, who co-created Centipede, insisted on vibrant colors and an insect theme to stand out from the monochrome space shooters that dominated the market. Her creative decisions helped broaden the visual language of arcade games and reinforce the idea that games could appeal to more than one demographic. During this period, gaming culture was still relatively open. Games were evaluated more on skill, design, and creativity than on whether they fit into a narrow masculine fantasy. Remember this though, because Nintendo is about to pull the most historically damaging marketing move of all time. Then, the industry crashed. The North American video game crash of 1983 to 1985 reshaped gaming in ways that are still being felt today. Industry revenue collapsed from $3.2 billion to roughly $100 million. Companies that survived were forced to rebuild public trust in video games as a product. Nintendo, preparing to release the NES, faced a critical branding dilemma. Retailers were wary of stocking anything that resembled a home console because the market had burned them so badly. Nintendo responded by marketing the NES as a toy rather than as electronic entertainment. That decision came with a problem that modern audiences sometimes forget. Retail in the 1980s was aggressively gendered. Toy stores were split into pink aisles and blue aisles, and companies were expected to choose a side. Nintendo chose the blue aisle. The decision was likely motivated by the illusion of stability rather than ideology, but the cultural consequences were massive. By placing video games in the boys section, Nintendo helped hard-code the idea that gaming was a male activity. Even the language reinforced it. The Game Boy didn't get its name by accident. And congratulations, that's the moment gaming becomes for boys. Not because of biology, because of shelf placement. This isn't a joke. This one decision basically sets up the next 40 years of discourse. Thanks, Nintendo. Once gaming became a boys' toy, it stopped being framed as a universal hobby and started being treated as a male identity. That shift turned gaming into something people felt entitled to defend. It also created the groundwork for gatekeeping culture, because when something becomes part of your identity, you treat change as a personal threat. And this is the part where gaming culture gets weird, and not the good kind of weird. Now we're entering the era where gaming becomes a personality trait. By the 1990s, the industry doubled down on this demographic strategy. Video game companies increasingly marketed towards young, heterosexual, often white, teenage boys and men. This was the era where the gamer label became a cultural identity. It wasn't simply a descriptor for someone who played games. It became a badge of honor that you would wear to be accepted into the cultural circle. And eventually, it became a wall that could be used to keep people out. This sounds harmless now, but it directly leads to the mess we end up in later. This period is often described through the lens of geek masculinity. The gamer was positioned as an outsider, a nerd, someone excluded from mainstream jock culture. Video games offered that person power and status in a world that felt hostile. Skills mattered in games, and that sense of control could feel intoxicating. Gaming became a refuge of sorts. It became a safe space. The problem is that safe spaces can turn defensive very quickly, especially when the people inside them believe they have to fight for the right to exist there. The 1990s also created a paradoxical landscape for women in gaming. Female protagonists became more visible, but their visibility often came through hypersexualized marketing designed for male consumption. Lara Croft is one of the most famous examples of this. When Tomb Raider launched in 1996, Lara became a mainstream cultural icon. However, the way she was marketed, according to my sources, frequently reduced her to a pin-up fantasy rather than a complex protagonist.
What makes you sweat? Is it passion? Or could it just be heat? What about not knowing if your very next breath will be your last? What about all three? Tomb Raider from IDOS Interactive.
Her creator, Toby Gard, originally envisioned her as realistic and level-headed. Marketing departments, though, saw an opportunity to sell a male fantasy instead. Advertisements from the late 1990s portrayed her as a femme fatale, tempting men away from their girlfriends, reinforcing the idea that gaming was primarily for men, and women existed within it as decoration. And this is where the culture starts sending a very clear message. Women can exist in games, but only if men can consume them. Anyway, capitalism ruins everything, per usual. Moving on. At the same time, first-person shooters exploded in popularity. Doom released in 1993 and helped cement gaming's association with violence, combat, and dominance. Retail spaces reinforced the message by filling walls with imagery of war and aggression. It didn't matter that girls were still playing games. The industry continued acting as if they didn't exist. So, in response to this exclusion, the mid to late 1990s saw the emergence of the Games for Girls movement. Researchers like Brenda Laurel began studying why girls were falling behind in computer skills compared to boys. Laurel interviewed over 1,000 children and found that the problem wasn't that girls disliked technology. Instead, many girls disliked being pandered to. Early girl games often featured dumbed-down mechanics and shallow gameplay. A 1985 Barbie title for the Commodore 64 became a common example of how gendered marketing could produce games that felt insulting rather than engaging. In 1996, Laurel founded Purple Moon, a company that created friendship adventure games such as Rocket's New School. These games focused on emotional decision-making, social belonging, and interpersonal conflict. The games were successful and praised for their research-based design, but they were often dismissed by hardcore gaming communities for lacking traditional mechanics. Purple Moon was eventually acquired by Mattel in 1999, and the original creative direction was effectively shut down. The rise and fall of Purple Moon became a preview of a larger pattern. Progress would happen, then be dismissed or absorbed by corporate branding, and then the same cultural debates would return again later under a different name. By the early 2000s, the industry entered another major turning point. In 2000, The Sims launched and arguably did more to reintegrate women into gaming than any marketing campaign of the previous decade. The Sims was, and still is, a life simulation sandbox that let players set their own goals. Instead of centering combat and dominance, it focuses on relationships, home building, and social experimentation. Its character creation systems were inclusive for their time, and the game's open-ended structure attracted an enormous and diverse player base. And women eventually became the majority audience. Portable gaming expanded that inclusion even further. The Nintendo DS launched in 2004 and brought in players who had been alienated by the aggressive branding of console gaming. Games like Nintendogs offered a low-pressure entry point. Then, smartphones transformed the industry again. Mobile gaming gave women the ability to play on their own terms, and it eventually became a space where women made up a large portion of the market. The stereotype that women only played casual games never told the full story, though. Alongside the growth of casual life simulation gaming, women were also carving out competitive spaces. In 2002, the PMS clan, originally called Psychotic Manslayers and later renamed Pandora's Mighty Soldiers, was founded to combat harassment on Xbox Live. The early Xbox Live environment was notoriously hostile for women. Voice chat could instantly turn into a harassment magnet. The PMS clan created a safe environment where women could train and compete in shooters, proving that skill was never the issue. Access and treatment were. The Frag Dolls, a professional team sponsored by Ubisoft in 2004, pushed that boundary even further. They became the first all-female team to win a professional circuit tournament in 2006, placing first in Rainbow Six Vegas 2. They also developed the Cadet Academy, a pipeline that offered internships and opportunities for women in the gaming industry. Women weren't only playing games. They were organizing, competing, and building infrastructure to support each other in a culture that often refused to do it for them. So no, women weren't too casual or not skilled. They were literally building competitive infrastructure because the culture refused to make room for them. So they did it themselves. Now, despite the growing numbers of female players, gaming culture in the early 2010s remained deeply hostile towards women. This was the era when nerd culture went mainstream. Comic-Cons grew rapidly, superheroes became pop culture royalty, gaming was everywhere. Instead of celebrating that growth, a certain subset of longtime gamers reacted with suspicion and resentment. This is where the fake gamer girl trope gained traction, accusing women of pretending to like games for attention. And as someone who was in middle school and high school at this time and liked video games, I can tell you, people told me I was lying for attention from boys because I was a girl and why else would I like them? Which sounds ridiculous, but it honestly put me off of games for a while because I felt like I wasn't welcomed, and I'm sure some of you have had similar experiences. In 2012, comic book artist Tony Harris posted on social media claiming women were posing as geeks to attract male interest. The post spread widely and fueled debates about whether women were infiltrating geek spaces or whether men were simply insecure. I think you might know where I land on that argument. But as gaming became less niche, some people began treating it like property. The logic was simple. If gaming had been their refuge when they felt excluded from mainstream culture, then newcomers were perceived as invaders rather than fellow fans. So naturally, people responded like rational adults, right? Guys? Right? That tension eventually erupted into Gamergate in 2014. Gamergate has often been framed as a controversy about ethics in games journalism, but the events surrounding it reveal something much larger. It became a decentralized harassment campaign targeting women and marginalized people in the gaming industry, using ethics as a public-facing justification. The movement didn't have formal leadership, which provided participants with plausible deniability. It functioned as a loosely coordinated swarm with different platforms serving different roles in the harassment process. Forums would identify targets and gather personal information, other spaces would plan attack strategies, and social media would serve as the execution platform. And if you've been waiting for the moment this turns into a full internet disaster, congratulations, we're finally here. The warning signs appeared before Gamergate fully ignited. In 2012, feminist media critic Anita Sarkeesian launched a Kickstarter campaign for her series Tropes vs. Women in Video Games, which aimed to analyze patterns of objectification and stereotyping in AAA titles. The response was immediate and extreme. Sarkeesian received death threats, rape threats, and doxing attempts. Harassers created games where players could assault her likeness. Ironically, the harassment fueled the Kickstarter's success, pushing it far beyond its original goal and bringing widespread attention to sexism in gaming culture. Gamergate officially erupted in August 2014 after Aaron Joni, the ex-boyfriend of indie developer Zoe Quinn, published a 10,000-word blog post about their relationship. The post, commonly known as the Zoe post, contained personal grievances and unverified accusations. As it spread, a rumor formed that Quinn had slept with Kotaku journalist Nathan Grayson in exchange for a positive review for her game, Depression Quest. That claim, though, was debunked later on. Grayson never reviewed the game, and he had only mentioned Quinn once professionally months before their personal relationship even began. Facts didn't slow the rumor down, though, because the rumor wasn't designed to be accurate. It was designed to be a tool. As harassment against Quinn escalated, Gamergate participants quickly recognized that a movement centered on a woman's sex life was difficult to defend publicly. The narrative shifted towards ethics and game journalism, allowing supporters to present themselves as activists rather than harassers. On August 27, 2014, actor Adam Baldwin amplified the controversy by tweeting links to videos spreading the allegations and using the hashtag Gamergate. His involvement helped propel the conflict from niche forums into broader public visibility, bringing in older and more politically conservative audiences. Again, as a reminder, guys, gaming is a hobby to most of these people that are outraged. A hobby. People are insane. Gamergate's tactics weren't random. They were coordinated and systematic. Targets experienced doxing, hacking, swatting, rape threats, death threats, and employer harassment. Swatting became one of the most dangerous tactics, involving hoax emergency calls that could trigger armed police responses. Several individuals who spoke out against Gamergate were swatted, including developer Brianna Wu. In October 2014, threats escalated further when Utah State University received an email threatening the deadliest school shooting in American history if Anita Sarkeesian's planned lecture was not canceled. These weren't edgy jokes. This was terrorism with anime avatars. They were threats designed to frighten women in leaving public life. Media coverage of Gamergate intensified when multiple gaming publications released essays arguing that traditional gamer identity was fading. Gamergate supporters labeled these pieces the "Gamers Are Dead" articles, treating them as proof of an organized conspiracy within gaming journalism. That belief was reinforced when people discovered Game Journo Pros, a private Google group where game journalists discussed industry news and sometimes coordinated coverage. While journalists viewed it as standard networking practices, Gamergate participants framed it as an activist cabal, a shadow government of gaming journalism. Gamergate also expanded into coordinated advertiser pressure campaigns. One of the most prominent was Operation Disrespectful Nod, which targeted advertisers of publications like Gamasutra and Polygon. The most high-profile incident occurred in October 2014 when Intel pulled advertising from Gamasutra after being flooded with complaints about an editorial by Lee Alexander. Intel later apologized and clarified that it didn't support discrimination, eventually pledging millions of dollars toward diversity initiatives in tech and gaming. The backlash created a strange irony. Harassment campaigns often ended up accelerating the very diversity efforts they were attempting to destroy. One of Gamergate's most significant long-term consequences, though, was its role in political radicalization. Figures such as Steve Bannon and Milo Yiannopoulos recognized Gamergate as a source of cultural energy and anger that could be redirected into politics. Breitbart began covering the movement heavily, framing it as a battle against feminism and cultural Marxism. Gamergate essentially became a pipeline that moved thousands of young men from gaming outrage into broader culture war politics. The tactics that formed during Gamergate, like irony-driven propaganda, coordinated harassment, meme warfare, and reputation destruction, became part of the blueprint for the political internet that emerged during the 2016 US election cycle and beyond. As harassment escalated, even 4chan eventually banned Gamergate discussion, leading many participants to migrate to 8chan. That shift pushed the movement further into extremist territory, connecting it with far-right communities and anti-Semitic ideologies. The FBI eventually launched an investigation into the threats made under the Gamergate banner. According to my sources, released documents later revealed over 170 pages of material, including references to threats of rape, homicide, mass murder, and even nuclear retaliation. Nuclear! You've got to be kidding me. Despite the scale of the investigation, no prosecutions followed. Anonymity, lack of prosecutable evidence, and legal complexities around proving intent all contributed to the inability to hold harassers accountable. So, yeah, that happened. And if you're sitting there thinking, what's wrong with people? Same. The consequences for women in gaming were severe. Many developers, critics, and creators left the industry. Others stayed but faced long-term trauma. Brianna Wu has spoken publicly about developing PTSD as a result of the harassment. Many women withdrew from public gaming spaces or adopted pseudonyms to avoid becoming targets. The chilling effect reached beyond individuals and into the creative environment of the industry itself. Harassment doesn't just silence voices. It narrows the range of stories that get told. At the same time, Gamergate also triggered a wave of support systems and institutional changes. Zoe Quinn co-founded Crash Override Network in 2015 to provide crisis support and resources for victims of online harassment. In 2017, the Fair Play Alliance formed as a cross-industry initiative focused on improving player interactions and encouraging safety by design. These efforts reflected a growing recognition that toxicity wasn't just a few bad actors, but a structural issue embedded in online culture. Modern gaming demographics make it increasingly difficult to pretend women are a niche audience. Between 2023 and 2026, women represent roughly 46% to 52% of gamers across major global markets. They generate billions of dollars in revenue, including an estimated $21 billion in 2023 alone. Women remain strongly represented in genres such as word games, puzzles, simulation, and life sims, but they're also a growing presence in competitive online titles like Fortnite and Call of Duty. Their visibility in those spaces is often limited because many women avoid voice chat to reduce exposure to harassment. The numbers are there, but the culture has made it difficult for women to participate publicly without becoming targets. One of the most significant shifts of the modern era has been women reclaiming gaming identity through content creation. Female streamers and creators on Twitch, YouTube, and TikTok have built massive communities that center the female experience. On TikTok, hashtags like #GamerGirl have become a tool for solidarity and community building. The rise of women publicly embracing gaming online has also weakened the fake gamer girl stereotype, because it's increasingly difficult to claim women are pretending when millions of them are broadcasting their skill, passion, and knowledge on a daily basis. Despite the progress made, harassment playbooks have not disappeared. In 2024 and 2025, some analysts and journalists began warning about a resurgence of the same cultural patterns, sometimes referred to as Gamergate 2.0. This new wave has targeted games and studios associated with diversity-focused storytelling. One of the major flashpoints involved Sweet Baby Incorporated, a narrative consulting company accused by reactionary gaming circles of forcing wokeism in major titles. The language and strategy closely mirrors the original Gamergate rhetoric, a belief that progressive forces are invading gaming, reshaping it, and taking it away from its real audience. The long-term danger of this backlash isn't only harassment, but creative stagnation. If developers fear doxing and threats, studios may avoid taking narrative risks entirely, leading to safer, less interesting games. Looking forward, initiatives like the Women in Games Manifesto 2026 highlight how the industry remains imbalanced. Quote, women make up nearly half of all players, yet fewer than 1/3 of the workforce, unquote. The evolution of the gamer girl is ultimately a story shaped by economic exploitation and cultural resilience. The decision to market video games as boys' toys after the 1983 crash created decades of friction between gaming and half its potential audience. Women didn't vanish from the medium. They were forced to adapt. They found new spaces, built their own communities, and continued creating even when gaming culture tried to shut them out. Over time, their influence reshaped the industry from the inside. Gaming today exists in a strange contradiction. It's more inclusive and diverse than it has ever been, with indie creators and AAA studios producing games that feature complex women protagonists, LGBTQ+ narratives, and emotionally rich storytelling. At the same time, the long shadow of Gamergate still lingers through persistent harassment, distrust, and recurring waves of anti-diversity mobilization. The culture war never fully left gaming. It simply evolved alongside the internet itself. The most sobering lesson is that online conflict is not accidental. It can be engineered, amplified, and weaponized, especially in spaces designed to reward engagement at any cost. Gamergate demonstrated how quickly outrage can be mobilized into harassment campaigns, and how easily political actors can exploit that anger for their own agendas. Until online platforms prioritize accountability over virality, these cycles will likely continue repeating in new forms. Still, the history of women in gaming shows something equally important. Women have always been here. They were writing early simulations, programming early consoles, shaping genres, building communities, and reclaiming spaces that never should have been taken from them in the first place. Gaming has always been more than a boys' club. The industry simply spent decades pretending otherwise. The future of gaming depends on whether the industry can finally move past the gendered aisles of the past and build a culture where everyone can participate without fear. If it does, I think gaming can become what it always had the potential to be, a space built by everyone, for everyone. If you made it to the end, thank you so much. I know this video was basically a feature-length documentary with emotional damage, and I really appreciate you sticking around. If you liked it, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and join the Historically Gaming crew, because I promise I have way more gaming history chaos planned for you guys. Also, go ahead and just send this to a friend, or maybe your group chat, and you know what? Go ahead and throw this into a Discord server too. Or better yet, send it to that guy in the Xbox lobby named Dark Reaper 69. I'm pretty sure he needs it the most. Not to start a fight, of course, but, also kind of to start a fight. Respectfully and educationally, of course. Alright, that's it. If you guys need me, I'm gonna go commit the crime of enjoying a video game as a woman. Bye!